I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turning around.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Neff Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. Another fantastic day to expand my mind, widen my horizons, because I have got Owen Marcus with me. Owen is an amazing man whose passion is men's health. And he is a man who understands that the issues lie in the tissues. And especially for us men, we are just such stupid beings when it comes to emotional intelligence. We need all the help we can get. And both O and I believe that we are very able to tap into these emotions, just not by maybe talking too much about them, but by actually addressing the physical states within our body, by addressing the soft tissues, by addressing the parts of our bodies that store all those memories. And it doesn't need to be the brain where that is. So when people talk about broken hearts, that's probably not bad, but we could also talk about broken guts, broken backs, broken, all the soft tissues there that we can actually tap into. So this is going to be an absolute amazing interview. Owen, welcome to my show.
Thanks, Stefan. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and wow. How did you get into that? I mean, this is not something that you wake up when you're 8 years old and say, hey, mommy, I know what I do. I'm going to be a men's health coach. Yay.
If you asked me in the beginning, I'd say there was no way in hell I'd do this. Uh, but what sort of got me into this was my undergraduate degree was in psychology. I decided I didn't want to go directly into being a therapist. Traveled some, ended up in Boulder, Colorado, back in the what was it? Like 1976. And ended up having a roommate that was an attorney, gave up his law practice to be a rolfer. A rolfer was a technique developed by Dr. Rolf where it works with the soft tissue, particularly the fascia, which is what holds everything together. And she realized by working on it in a certain way, you could release chronic stress, which is the physical and the emotional stress. And with her process, realign the body. So as she would say, it would be in better alignment with gravity, thereby not only looking better, but functioning better. So it was a huge change for me. I went through the 10 sessions. 9 months later, I was an inch taller and short of 20 pounds lighter. And I was never fat. I was just tense. I had huge, thick legs, and I didn't walk, I waddled. So that gives you a sense of how tight I was. And so all that tension left, and most of that was emotional. And I realized later where that came from my family's dysfunction, and then later realizing I grew up with dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, dyspraxia, which is sort of dyslexia of the body, and Asperger's, and then later Lyme disease. So I had a lot of stress I was enduring, and I put it in my body. So when it started to leave, literally my body got lighter, my emotions got lighter, and I pursued that career. But as I was pursuing that career, I started learning more and more about stress and trauma and the physiology of it. And then in 1995, when I had my integrated medical clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona, I realized that, I changed a lot, but my relationships weren't any better. And I saw that I was a consistent variable. I was smart enough to realize that I needed to change. And I had resistance to the thought of working with men, like having a men's group. And I said, well, if I had a resistance, there's probably a reason I have it. Maybe I should do it. So I started a group out of my clinic in 1995. It was mediocre. But to make the story shorter, in 2005, I was living in Idaho up near the Canadian border and started a new group, but started it with a new paradigm, which was integrating all that I'd learned and used clinically around the physiology of stress and emotions and adapting it to working with men and, through verbal interaction, take men deeper into their experience. And so my belief, and now it's become my experience, that if I'm working with you, Stefan, if I ask you something and you give me, say, an intellectual answer, And keep asking you questions, which might be oriented around your body, that takes you deeper into your somatic and then emotional experience. What happens is you start to connect to parts you were disconnected from. And that essentially happens as you relax, it's like you literally or metaphorically allow these parts to come back. Now, are you familiar with IFS or internal family systems?
Mm. Please teach us, even if I know it, but the audience probably doesn't. So just
Yeah. So
outline it.
that was a kind of therapy developed by Richard Schwartz, which we had on our program a few years ago. And a brilliant guy. I really loved the guy. And he was a psychologist out of Boston. And, he used family system theory to work with people individually. And his thesis is that we all have these parts that are sort of disassociated from us. And I would agree with that. So he has an elaborate procedure to bring it back. My experience is that if you just get guys relaxed, and maybe with some simple questions, they start to connect to these parts that they can disconnected from. And we had to disconnect from them because in their past with stress and trauma, our experience was too big for the situation. And so what couldn't exist in the situation, we disassociated from. It's sort of this we checked out from. And so when you reverse the process, you relax a guy and he's with other men, in this case, that he feels safe with, he'll just naturally start to open up, start to connect to things physically and emotionally, maybe express them. And we've had men literally transform their lives from going through an experience like this because they get to connect to things that they had to essentially leave behind.
And we leave them behind because there is a good reason for that. This dissociation is very much a trauma response that we see again and again and again. It is actually far more common than we like to believe. And in all fairness, I mean, if I was trying to think back, someone challenged me to go back into my childhood and tell them a bit about my childhood from an emotional point of view. I couldn't bring you more than 5 memories. And that probably says a lot. Okay. So, whilst I certainly did not have bloods and gore and the real extremes of dysfunctional families in my family, my family tried their best on what they could do under the circumstances, I have to say. Still, there is trauma that I probably have not even ever realized. So these kind of things are actually very, very, very common. And we see it again and again, just
Oh
in
yeah,
various
yeah, and
degrees.
and it's amazing, and it doesn't have to be, as they say, the big T trauma, but in most cases, it's what I call micro trauma or
Mm,
stress. And as you were saying, and this is what Peter Levine, who's like developed somatic experience, is an old friend of mine, and he was originally a Rolfer, and Dr. Rolf said, Peter, you're too small to be a Rolfer. So he got a couple PhDs in physiology and really discovered all this.
yeah.
So he was teaching us Rolfers back in 1980. And it was one of those experiences when someone says something that you sort of knew, but that you didn't know. And I got these cold chills from my body because
Mm,
he said, well, we don't only have fight and flight, we have freeze. And he explained, because that was the first time I ever heard that.
mm,
And he was like the first person ever saying this. This is
mm,
1980, that
mm,
when an animal or mammal can't run or fight, we default to reptilian behavior of
mm,
freezing,
mm,
which sets up the disassociation.
mm,
But I used to live in the forests of Idaho, and I used to say, look, I've had deer out in my meadow, and if the local cougar attacked a deer and the cougar wasn't hungry and would leave the quote dead deer, what would happen is the deer a few minutes later would stand up and he'd shake it off. He would tremble for a few minutes
mm,
and then run away. And because he could do that, he would have no PTSD.
mm,
The trauma would leave his body. But the problem that we all have in our sophisticated culture is we have these experiences, again, not usually major traumas, but in some cases, major traumas.
mm,
And the situation was such that we couldn't physiologically shake it off.
mm,
And so it stayed with us. And one of the
mm,
consequences of it staying with us is that one, the physiology of that hyperarousal stays with us, and the disassociation or connection
mm,
from the full experience does not stay. We disconnect from it because it was too much.
mm,
And we can't connect to it until our physiology sort of comes back online. So as our physiology comes back online, so do our emotions and often our cognitive abilities.
But then again, you could say, well, hang on, if the dissociation has served a purpose, why the hell should I get back in touch with that trauma? It's nicely packaged away, it's nicely sitting somewhere. Who cares?
And that's a good question. And often the disassociation or the compensation for it, or I would often call the survival strategy, worked. And people have shame about it. I go, no, 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 don't have shame. It worked. You survived. You're here. Congratulations. And they go, oh, okay. Now here's the problem. As much as it allowed you to survive and got you here, now it's sabotaging your life, and probably most particularly around relationships. So, like now, your wife starts to get upset and you check out and she feels you checking out and that scares her and she gets more upset and you check out more. So we got to work with you not checking out so that, when she wants your
Hmm.
connection, you're there for her. So your survival strategy worked. It's not working in your relationship.
Beautifully said. I know it was a loaded question, devil's advocate here, but you completely obliterated my question. It was beautiful. And that's exactly what we experience again and again and again. So the adverse childhood experiences, or indeed whatever kind of trauma has happened, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the childhood. It can be later on. These traumas have flow-on effects. These traumas do cause us to develop coping mechanisms that are often trying to escape our reality. I mean, that is anything addiction from shopping to social media, from porn to gambling, from eating to drugs and alcohol, and I could go on. There are so many of them, but I think these are all actually quite easy to pick up when you step back. What is not so easy to pick up is the relationship problems, because no one really talks about them. Yeah, men bitch about their women, and women bitch about their men. And if you are gay, lesbian, or any kind of other, then you bitch about the others. It is a bitching contest, but we are not really stopping and thinking, why does this person trigger me so much? Why do I not have my needs fulfilled? For that, of course, you need to know what are your needs and whoever stops to actually learn their love languages. So you see already, just by those few sentences, how complex this is.
Well, and I fully agree, and I would add to that. So you might have some insight to it. So you cognitively understand it,
Yeah.
but because this is such a physical, unconscious, and emotional thing,
Mm,
it's a bottom-up phenomenon, not a top-down. So
mm,
what I've seen with a lot of people, they do a lot of like cognitive analytical therapy, and they really understand it, but then they start beating themselves up because they go, "Well, I understand
mm,
my problem, but why can't I fix it?"
mm,
And it must be me. And I go, no, no, it's not you. Maybe it was a process because it's a physiological thing. And in that way, you're sort of unconscious. It's an unconscious thing, which doesn't mean you can't change it. It means you need a process that facilitates that kind of change. And so understanding is good and often gets you into the room,
mm,
but really what gets the change at some level, at some time, has to show up in the body if it's going to
mm,
be sustainable.
mm. And we see it again and again because there are so many um, physical signs and symptoms, I call them, rather than diseases, that are linked to our emotions. And if we start rephrasing things, then your chronic Achilles tendonitis, or your chronic shoulder pain, or your chronic back pain, your chronic neck pain might actually have more to do with the way you're living right now as a consequence of those things that happened to you in the past than actually with physical damage. As a pain physician in the past, we did again and again and again MRIs, and the MRIs didn't show much, but we often
Right.
did that to actually just rule out nasty things like cancer or broken bones. But also, the 22nd MRI might finally bring home to that person that there is nothing wrong on their neck and they don't need their
Well,
17th
nothing
operation.
wrong in the bones, but as you know with MRIs, it doesn't measure soft tissue.
And
And
we
it certainly
can't,
doesn't measure fascia. And fascia is the organ of stress. So,
touche.
so, you know, because I've worked with a lot of physicians
Mm,
from, the pain physicians, the orthopedic surgeons and physiatrists, and which were, the physiatrists were more akin to the soft tissue stuff, as you know.
mm,
And so you're right. People would come in with all, from the Mayo Clinic or whatever, all these diagnoses, which were usually nil. I mean, it was like they said, well, I do all these tests and nothing shows up, but I still have pain.
mm,
And they want to give me antidepressants or this or that. I
mm.
go, look, I remember one woman, I'll never forget her. She was sitting on my couch. She just spent a week at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona. And at the end, after all the negative tests, all the doctor could recommend was an antidepressant.
Mm,
And I said, no,
mm,
everything you told me is real. You really do have neck pain. But fortunately, it's not in your bones, and it's this, that, and that, and we'll see what we can do. Within a few sessions, her pain was gone, and then a few more, she felt great, and
mm.
she just started crying because I was the first one that told her she wasn't nuts.
Very,
And
very true.
I mean, it's
Yep.
our bodies are a literal metaphor for who we are. So we have a
Mm,
pain in the neck. So often someone's bothering us, and so there's usually, like you said, if it's a chronic situation, that, and it's particularly if it's in a soft tissue, there's usually more to it than a physical injury.
absolutely. And it's the beautiful thing that we nowadays realize in functional medicine, a holistic approach to the human body, that we can see that most of the systems in the body are interconnected. So it's not just, there's the brain, there is the gut, and the brain tells the gut to do something. No, it is going back, but also there are the hormones that are linked in somewhere there, and there are other things that are linked in. So virtually everything in the body is interlinked, which makes it very complex. But it also gives us an opportunity to start pulling a bit here and a bit there and a bit there on the spider web. So, if we were to say actually the issues lie in the tissues, then of course you could start working on that side. You can work on your fascia, you can work on movement therapy that facilitates insights. Now, we know that stress in its own right is a major, major disruptor, causes inflammation. Now, this inflammation in its own right, well, we can calm down if you suddenly become aware and are emotionally able to deal with the challenges from the past as well as the challenges now. Now, that becomes a complete different story. So now you're moving, you are with the movement, you also learn breathing. You learn to use the diaphragm, and you learn to use your vagus nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system, in different ways. Guess what you're doing? You're working on the stress. Ta-da! And suddenly, because you're actually making changes, your gut works a little bit better. And now you've also learned that there maybe with the shit that you're eating, that doesn't help so much. So maybe you're throwing the odd broccoli in there and maybe the odd other green leaf vegetable. So can you see how you suddenly are back in control? Because there's so many things that you can do. But you need to start somewhere. And it's beautiful that we actually start with the symptom in this case. The symptom is pain or restriction of movement or low quality of life, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that being a physician and working with all these people, but guys in particular, generally speaking, I think it's starting to change a little,
Uh,
is that we tend not to do anything until we're in pain. And I used to, when I had my clinic, I get people, often physicians, that say, look, I want to send you my friend, and he's telling his friend for years to see me. And finally, literally, his friend sort of crawls in to see me. He can barely move. And, in one session, he's like 95% out of pain. And then he gets upset with his friend. And I said, look, your friend's been trying to get you here for years, but you had to wait until it got that bad where you had no choice, and you
yeah.
and you finally did some. And
Mm,
so, yeah, particularly as guys, we tend to wait to take care of ourselves until we have to. And
mm,
unfortunately, for some guys, it's too late. And I just
mm,
had a good friend of mine die a couple of months ago because he had a heart attack. He was an
mm,
athlete,
mm.
but I was always on his case because just because you can, ride a bike across America doesn't mean that, you can have a junk food diet.
Touche. Touche. I mean, is there a way that we can do right now a little experiment? I know I'm going at the moment through a divorce. I'm going through a lot of stress in my life. There's no way that my fascia are not affected. And I know this morning, I mean, when I sort of in my like a tennis player when you bounce the ball just before the serve. I do the same prior to the interview. You saw me, and I sort of was trying to sort of straighten my neck, and my neck told me, "Oh, get lost." Um, is there is there something that we can practice right now to actually show how easy it can be to address the physical state of you and the body?
There's a few things I can do. I mean, one of the simplest thing is what I call the rock formula, ROC. So we slow down to relax, we open up to be vulnerable, and we reach out to connect. So guys, we've been told to relax for years. I've always been relax, Owen, but no one told us how to do that.
Uh,
So it becomes another performance thing that just only makes us more stressed. So
okay.
we learn to relax by slowing our physiology down. And you know this. We do, that one of the easiest ways is our breath because it's a part of the autonomic nervous system, but it's a part that we can control. And so, as you also said, when we can get a handle on a part of our body that represents the autonomic, unconscious, physical, or emotional part, we can start to affect it. Breath is the easy one. When I was a role for manipulating the fascia, that was another way to sort of intervene into that system that normally we think we'd have no effect of.
Mm.
And so right now, we can just take an easy breath. I mean, there's a lot of breath techniques. And as you also probably know, and we'll do it right now, we can take an inhale of like 2 seconds, hold it for 2 seconds. Now let go in 4 seconds. And then inhale in 2, hold for 2, and let go for 4. And then as you do that, I'll just do a couple more rounds, just feel your body. And in your case, feel your shoulders. Feel the weight of your shoulders. And let that weight just drop down, like your neck muscles, your extensors, your scaling muscles, all those muscles just relaxed, your trapezius. And it's as if your shoulders are just sitting on your rib cage, heavy, feeling, responding to the pull of gravity. Right, that's it. And letting the shoulders ride the wave of the breath. With the inhale and with each exhale, there's a sense of release, of letting go. And we often unconsciously or habitually hold on to a little bit of our breath. And the new research shows that we're actually CO2 deprived. We need more CO2, as you probably know, most people do, in their blood or in their hemoglobin to be able to take oxygen into the cell. And so a lot of people are hyperventilating, and we really see that with someone has a panic attack. You give them a paper bag to breathe into, and they're really breathing in more CO2, which relaxes them. And there's therapies where you literally start breathing CO2, and that relaxes you. And yeah, we put a lot of stress in our shoulders.
And it's beautiful how you just guided me through that. Actually, there were a lot of things happening here at the same time, guys. If you look at it, what we have just done is triangular breathing. So we basically took a relatively actually short phases of breathing in 2, holding 2, breathing out 4. That is, if you're new to the game, very soon you do that 4 in, 4 hold 6, 7, 8 out. And with that, you're slowing down your breathing. Therefore, you're coming down now to 6, 5, 4 breaths a minute. Each breath exhales carbon dioxide because we are no longer exhaling as many times. Therefore, CO2, carbon dioxide, rises up. And that's exactly what we are discussing here. We're also, because you've guided me to use my diaphragm, my tummy breath, rather than the bird breath where you just breathe out there, you're actually trying to really move your gut. With that, you've got parasympathetic nervous system stimulation, etc. Also, did you notice Owen's tone changed? There was a little bit of hypnosis technique coming in there, and there's nothing wrong with that. So you see, this various things happened at the same time, at least 3, 4 things that I could pick up on, where we start changing our state, where we're changing our physiology to the better, where we're
You're
switching off the
sharp. You're
fight and flight.
sharp. That was a little Ericksonian or indirect
Was it
hypnosis.
not?
And yeah, and it gets into the co-regulation. So, if I'm relaxed and you hear it in my voice, and that's what Stephen Porges, a scientist, developed polyvagal theory, and how the vagus nerve works. And that goes, as you inferred, it goes 80% up to our brain
Hmm,
and 20% down. So it goes up through our diaphragm or our
hmm,
heart, our vocal cords, and all these facial muscles of expression.
hmm.
And so you're picking up that I'm relaxed. So you start to co-regulate with my relaxation, which is what we want. And that's what we didn't have when we were kids, or when we were stressed out, or maybe in some trauma. We had no one to anchor
Yep,
to that was relaxed.
yep. The role modeling, isn't it? And that is so weird. When we say that children are like sponges, they very much so, but not just on a wisdom and knowledge kind of brain hemisphere thing. No, they are very much astute to sensing what is around them because that's what keeps them alive. They can't
Exactly.
defend they can't defend themselves. So they have to very quickly pick up what's going on so that mommy and daddy does not kill them and eat them whatsoever.
You're exactly right. Or even, maybe subtly with that, we are dependent not only on the physical survival of our parents, but the emotional survival. And what
Mm,
attachment theory teaches us, and from the work of Bowlby and on, is that if we don't have secure attachment, to the extent that we don't, it's a stress and possibly a trauma. And
mm,
so, what a child will do, they will, and I did, and maybe you did, and most of us did in this culture. We will sacrifice ourselves,
mm,
on an emotional level and consequently physiological level for
absolutely.
that love.
Mm,
And so, where the gaps are in secure connection between the parents and with us, we make it about ourselves because it's easier, at least in the short term, to make it
mm,
about ourselves and adjust or compensate to continue to get what little love or support or connection we can from our parents. Unfortunately, we
mm,
never, unless we doing what you're saying,
mm,
deliberately go to unlearn it, it keeps driving the system.
mm. And that's so hard because we don't recognize that unless someone actually explains it to you in simple terms. You have no clue that this is what is happening. The only thing you can see is that you get triggered, that you get angry, that you have got that really mean streak in yourself and you hate yourself for it. And now you're creating more shame and guilt and negative emotions about the way you respond to your environment, not realizing that there was a damn
Exactly.
good reason for it. So
And
no,
then
that
you, as you're saying, you reinforce it.
correct. Yeah. And there is so much that we can do. And it seems so banal, so simple to just breathe, really? But it's not just breathing. Breathing is the start of it. Breathing is the start of actually living intentionally. Most of our emotions are, oh, sorry, thoughts, most of our thoughts that we have, 60, 80,000 thoughts a day, about 80% of them are negative. And they are often relating to the past or the future.
Hmm.
Who of us actually stops to not even think, to actually stop thinking and just resting and just doing nothing but actually stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, i.e., meditation, breathing, techniques, yoga, similar, similar beautiful techniques to strengthen you. Most of us don't do it. And when we
And
do it, that's where the magic happens.
yeah, because like you said, it is a strengthening exercise, but not in the normal sense. You're strengthening new patterns.
Mm,
And as you're inferring, what happens is over time, it starts to become the default.
mm.
So rather than the sympathetic or stress state as your
Yeah.
default, you you, you become what I call it, you're in the idle, you're idling. So your engine's not always revving at 500 RPMs, it's at 1500.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, as you can imagine, it's healthier for your body, for your relationships. And so it doesn't mean you never go up, but you naturally sort of come back down.
Mm,
But by doing all these things you're talking about, we retrain the body, the nervous system, the endocrine system, and eventually we learn. It takes a while, but I, I tell these men there's nothing wrong with you psychologically. It's showing up physiologically, but
mm,
it's a learned behavior
mm,
and you can unlearn it and you have the hard wiring for all that we're talking about to be relaxed, to use the
mm,
parasympathetic. That's how we're designed. And then, so that did not leave you. It's just that you're not using those physical capabilities. So you got to unlearn some stuff
mm.
and learn some other stuff. And over the last few years, it's gotten
Yeah.
a lot, we've developed a lot more simple in some ways, but sophisticated in other ways processes to facilitate that for people,
Mm,
as you know, all
mm,
do well.
mm. And it is beautiful. I mean, in all fairness, many of these techniques have saved my life. There were times when trauma was just so overwhelming, or my own thoughts, my own feelings that were just washing over me like a tsunami. They were brutal in their strength, and they were sapping all the hope out of me. And many men out there are in the same boat. I don't know what it is with 2024. I shall really say from 2020 onwards, there has been a lot of trauma been happening. There is not one man around me who has not gone through a lot of shit. And when I say man, I specifically today wanna take us men collectively in our arms, because we are the amount of suicides that
Hmm.
are out there are unbelievable, and it is still too few people are talking about it, and that is when really everything is too much. Yet there are ways that we can work together. I loved your rock. Um, it is I use an acronym called a RAIN, and that you
Mm.
recognize your emotions, that you accept this emotion
Hmm.
for what it is. You interrogate it, or look a bit more closely on it, but then thereafter you nurture yourself. You accept it was part of you, wherever this emotion came from. And you sit with this emotion and you try to get to know it. Because once we actually get to know our emotions, get to know our feelings, that's where we can really understand us in a better way, and then maybe take uh, different ways of approaching those emotions when they come in the future, because now they're like an old friend coming back, and that friend might be quite stinky when it comes to anger or guilt or shame, but they can also be beautiful like joy or like hope, or etc. So we can learn things. So
Well, I think
what
that's beautiful.
Mm,
And I think you nailed it. I think it's all in this ability to slow down and start to accept it because we've been running from these emotions.
exactly.
But the deal is they've been chasing us. They never leave us. So to have the courage that you speak about, it's a turn, stop, number one,
Yeah.
turn and face it and let the emotion catch up to you. And maybe it knocks you down, maybe it's overwhelming, but you let it do its thing and then you get back up and you face it and you let it go through your body
Mm,
and as you're sort of describing, you start to have compassion for the
mm,
emotion and for yourself. Maybe the compassion that you never had and deserved as a kid.
yep.
And that's one of the reasons that, I find these men's groups and trainings with other men are so powerful is that, because we didn't have that compassion. We didn't have a safe space. We didn't have secure
Yeah.
attachment. You can
Yeah.
call a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But when you get a group of guys together, and inevitably, one guy has the guts to be a little more vulnerable, and then the next guy does, and almost gets competitive, and they all start being vulnerable, and they're crying, and they go from, if it was a situation outside of there, they
Yeah.
might be shaming each other.
Yep.
In this context, they're
Yep.
supporting each other, and it
Correct.
rewires their nervous system because it does what you said, because yes, we can do it for ourselves, but we learn how to self-regulate, at least we should learn how to self-regulate and how to have self-compassion
Mm.
because others were co-regulating with us and had compassion for us.
Mm.
But we were all deprived of that opportunity and those skills.
Mm.
So we're struggling with how do I regulate myself? And how do I turn down the stress? And how do I have compassion? How do I love myself? Because we didn't get enough of that as kids. And in a quote healthy environment, we would have had that. And we would have been able to do it ourselves
Mm.
as an adult.
So true. So true. But I think what you are pointing towards is the connection. The opposite
Mhm.
to addiction is connection. The opposite to the darkness of mental health problems, let that be depression, let that be PTSD, is connection. We see it again and again. We see it as a prophylactic measure. For
Mhm.
example, soldiers that have fight in wars such as the Falkland Wars was a classic example, a
Mhm.
very brutal war in the very cold and nasty circumstances in the 80s. And the British won. The British lost a lot of men. There were a lot of damage, a lot of trauma was there. Now, some of the men got put on airplanes and they were back in civilian street within 48 hours. Others were put on the troop carriers and made the long way back via sea towards UK. There was a huge difference between the amount
Mm.
of PTSD because those
Mm.
men who were on the troop ships, the only thing they had to do was show up once a day to show that they haven't fallen off the boat, and then the rest of the time they were able to talk, they were able to cry, they were able to just lie silent in their bunk if they wanted to. But inevitably, there was a community there for them who had gone through the same shit and who were able to support each other. And by just talking, these guys
Mm.
could resolve a lot of their trauma and the amount of PTSD that occurred later on was hugely different. So
Mm.
take this as an example, as proof. And there are many other studies that I could quote here
I never heard
where,
that. I'm not a
mm,
Brit, but that's an amazing study. I never heard that, and it's
yeah,
so true. And I've heard similar studies, but
mm,
yeah, and that's what we try to do for men is give them the opportunity to just do it for each other. And
mm.
and as you're inferring, if we were both there, consoling you, Stefan, but that helps me.
Absolutely. Exactly right. By you being open, it is acknowledging that you are still dealing with things. I had last Friday, I got a friend around, and we both are going through divorce. We both have gone in the past through darkness. And he said, "Oh, well, tell me." And I briefed him in no uncertain words. I didn't put any mask, any filter, any whatsoever on, and included my darkest moments. And that was exactly what he needed, because half
Mm.
an hour later, he admitted to me that there were some very dark moments in him recently. And it was coming out of his shell was probably one of the best things we could have done at that moment in time for him. So it is beautiful. And guys out there, if you listen to this, you are not the only one feeling like that. Whatever has happened, you are not the only one. And if this is a pissing contest, friends, you're gonna lose. You're gonna lose. You think your trauma was big? I find you other dudes who have gone through twice as much, 10 times as much as you. You think your behavior was shit? You think you have should be ashamed. Oh, I can bring you together with men. Hey, you are a choir boy compared with what they have done.
Right.
So,
And with that, we'll do trainings with special ops guys that,
mm,
seen a lot of battle and all that stuff. And, and they're courageous even emotionally. And when guys, regular guys see these guys, which are sort of the archetypical masculine
mm,
guy, open up, it gives them permission and then these guys that had severe trauma,
yeah,
hear some guy say, well, my trauma wasn't not that bad. And then that, special ops guy said, it doesn't matter how
yeah,
good or bad your trauma was or
exactly.
how you weren't loved or whatever, it impacted you. It's
Hugely,
all subjective. And
hugely.
as you said, as guys, you get very competitive.
Mm,
And we did a big study several years ago, and the big takeaway was men don't feel they're good enough.
yep, absolutely.
And when we can hear other men in some way, like you did with your friend, reveal, not just say, but reveal how they're not good enough relative to the masculine model, that really opens them up. Like, and then the next thing we heard, particularly the pandemic, is we were doing things virtually for guys all over the world, and we could have maybe 100 guys on a call, and then we break them out in Zoom group or breakout groups in Zoom, and you're with three, four other guys that you've never met from all over the world, and and you're talking for 10, 15 minutes,
Yeah,
and you come back and you're saying, I just told these guys things I've never told anyone else. I don't know who they are. And it's one because they were maybe strangers, but really because everyone was open,
mm,
and we need that.
yep.
And then they go, I thought I was the only one. I can't remember how many times I heard that. I thought I was the only one. And as you're saying, we're not the only one.
Wow. This is very, very, very profound. I mean, this is so this is so true. And it is so weird because here we have got a solution to some fundamental, literally life and death problems that men are facing right now. Yet, why do men, why is there, if at all, a worsening of mental health in men when we actually know that there are solutions out there, when we maybe have come further than many generations before us?
Yeah, I think that's true. It is the stats are getting worse. We have stats now,
Mm,
and we never did before, and people
mm,
are listening to them.
mm,
One of the things that I think is good is the media and then government starting to look at it. Uh, there's a fellow named Reeves, Richard Reeves. He was a Brookings fellow. He's a Brit. Wrote a book called Of Boys and Men, and he really unpacks it all, and he does it beautifully. And he takes all the research and he explains why boys and men are suffering, and from an institutional level, what needs to be done. And institutionally, I agree with him. But as he admitted when he was on our program, it's a top-down approach, and we need a
mm,
top-down approach, but we need a scalable bottom-up approach.
mm.
But one of the things he did say, which, when I read his book, and he said on the program, was that the conservatives and the liberals get it wrong. The conservatives want to take men and the culture back to the 50s, where, it's a man's world. And the reason we have all these problems is, we'll
Uh-huh.
go on.
Yeah.
And the liberals, they feel anything that you do for men or boys, you're taking away from girls and women. And he says both are wrong. And if you keep fighting or trying to solve it either way, we're not going to help these boys and
Yeah.
men, and
Yeah.
everyone suffers.
I like that. I like that a lot. That I absolutely 100% agree. We have got a very confused masculinity out there, and I think just as much femininity out there. Women want to do it all, want to have it all, and they want to have it yesterday. And men try to be everything. They try to be feminine, but then they are not good enough because they're not men. And then if they're too much men, oh, now you're toxic. to actually, I do not envy my two sons. They're in their early 20s now. How the hell do they know which level is just about right now for that person? And it's just bloody hell.
And
Life.
you can't figure it out because it's not an intellectual thing. And my take on that is that, and this is not to blame anyone, but ever since the Industrial Revolution, men had to go to work. So
Mm,
women stepped in and showed up, and they were the both of the parents, and they were the teachers and the
mm,
nurses and the psychologists and all that. So the the whole model of what it is to be a man emotionally sort of skewed towards the feminine. And it's not, a conspiracy theory. That's just what happened.
mm,
And so, women and men too think that to be emotional, you got to get in touch with your feminine side. I hear that all the
mm,
time.
mm, mm,
And it's really, a guy just has to get in touch with his masculine emotional side.
mm,
And the beauty is when they work with other men, like in our system or groups or
mm,
trainings, we don't have to teach them how to be emotional. They teach each other
mm,
because it's intrinsic in us. It's in us. It's
mm,
in our epigenetics. We know how to do it. We just need a place to see it, see someone else do it. As you said, we learn a lot vicariously or watching, and we
mm,
need a safe place to practice it where we can screw up. Because like learning anything,
mm,
you're going to screw up in the beginning. And so we create these safe environments where guys can teach each other in a natural interaction, learn and practice,
mm.
find their masculine emotional connection in their own unique way. And then the beauty is women love it. And in our groups, it's a joke. And it had been this joke for years. The best night for sex was the night of the men's group. Because I had women tell me that this was, I developed this group in a small town. So I'd run into these women and they like grab me and thank me. And they sort of sheepishly admit that, when John comes home from the group, I just want to rip his clothes off because he's a man and he's open and he's sensitive and that's the guy I fell in love with.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Oh, no, you're quite right. You're quite right. That is what lies underneath. If you go really into the laws of attraction, if you go in and look at what women really want. And it's very careful. I've got a Y chromosome, so who am I to tell anyone what women really want? But I guess I've got a certain expertise because I failed, and I have tried
We
many
all.
ways. I've tried many ways, different ways. And I think the one thing that really truly uh, shines as a beacon where women are drawn to like moth to a flame is your healthy masculinity. Your you as being a man who is in control of your emotions, who is in control of yourself, who is in control, but in a positive way, who shows integrity, authenticity, who can be vulnerable, yet still be a man. And it's finding that strength within you.
Well, and we said, and I would refine that because in this culture we talk about it as control, which for me has a bit of a connotation. I know what you mean, but in our culture, control is sort of a top-down thing. We got to control our emotions, control our stress. But
Okay.
really, what you're really saying, I know what you mean, is we have to have a relationship with it. So when you're really down-regulated, when you're not in a survivable stress state, you have that control you want. And it's that, as you would say, the parasympathetic is driving the bus. You're in this relaxed, open, and powerful state,
Mm,
a magnanimous, compassionate state. That's your default.
mm,
And your stress state, your survival state is in the back seat, always ready, but not
mm,
driving it. And when people feel that, they feel safe
mm,
and they pick it up non-verbally.
mm,
They feel open. They want to connect with you.
mm,
And when you have confidence in that state, when you have that power and in your own internal authority, there's that sense of control, but you're not repressing anything to have control.
mm,
And if I'm not repressing myself to be in control, I'm not going to repress you. So you're going to feel safer. And
mm,
so if I screw up or like you did that, a while ago. We tried to connect on this. Your computer broke. You apologized. And it's like you were vulnerable. I had no problem with it. We reconnected. So that's a simple example of you being
Mm.
vulnerable, you not being in control, you giving up control, you fixing the problem, reaching, it's the rock formula, slowing down, open up, being vulnerable, reaching out for a connection. And, I had nothing to do but to connect with you. And it was like not a big deal for us. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's a different kind of control
Yeah.
that is more
Yeah.
natural and intrinsic on who we want to be. And and it flows.
Okay, beautiful. What you're just saying there, Owen, that was happening actually with us, 2 hours ago, when we initially had scheduled to have our interview. But what was happening, my computer indeed had a software problem that completely obliterated the abilities of my computer. And I felt myself going into a spiral very quickly. Despite all the work that I've done, the emotions are still there. Ah, look, you're a failure. You've let him down. You have, etc. There was these voices starting to go into hyperdrive, and it was interesting. I was getting really angry because I had not expected that I now need to spend maybe days. So there was the catastrophizing going on, all those negative emotions. I recognized them for what they were. Whilst part of me was dealing with those emotions and saying, hey, old friends, but you really are the stinky ones. Can you just stop it for a moment there? Let me actually focus what needs to be done here. And I identified the software problem, got rid of that software, and within an hour, everything was working again. I now had to make amends. And I sent a text to you and apologizing that I stood you up, etc. But it was actually, whilst all these negative emotions were going, I took action to A, work on my state, B, to rectify the problem, and actually show integrity, even when things went wrong. And then I jumped over my ego because I sort of said, hey, I really would love to connect with you. And, any time is good. And you said, and I said, even now. And you said, give me 5 minutes. And there we were. So the whole thing this morning, and an hour of terror for me, could have completely spiraled me out of control, or because maybe of the work that I have done,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
allowed me to get myself back on track. And it took a little bit. We started talking, and I was still a bit befrazzled. I was still a bit, it doesn't even if you practice it, it doesn't work immediately. There's no switch where you can somehow antagonize all the adrenaline and the cortisol, etc.
Mm-hmm.
No, you need to be aware of that, but you can shorten that. That could have spiraled me out of control for days in the past,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, or it gave me a little hiccup for an hour and a half, maybe give it 90 minutes. And but now I've had a fantastic talk with you. I just realized that I need to celebrate this morning's upset as a win. I need to celebrate that this was potential new trauma, but I dealt with that. I was down, but I got up, dusted myself off, and here we are. I
So you
showed up.
did the same thing for yourself that you did for your computer. You rebooted yourself because your software was corrupt. And you
Love
started
it.
to run the old screwed up program, and you said, no, I'm going to reboot. You rebooted and you got on with me. And then the other thing that happened, you had all the things you did and you know how to do that and you did it. And there was a bit of a lag effect, but we co-regulated, and I was
Yeah.
relaxed and I teased you and joked and quickly, you were like in your best form because, we were connecting.
Touche. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. So true. So you need to tell me more about Melt then, because that is your baby. That is your program. You are practicing what you preach. You are walking the walk. Tell us more.
Well, as you said, I'm not a master at it, and I'll never be a master at it. But I'm on that road, and Yeah, it's meld is man's emotional leadership. It's meld dot community where you find us, and it's not COM, it's community spelled out. Uh, and it really comes from years of working with people one to one clinically and then in groups, particularly men's groups and corporations and across the board, and just taking the latest science and distilling it down into generally simple, effective processes. I don't usually like the word techniques, but you could say techniques, skills, principles that we've honed over the years of working with thousands of guys that are really effective. And part of what it does is it turns on our natural ability to do these things, to downregulate, to relax, to connect, to
Mm,
use each other, to support each other in the ways that we used to as in our ancestors, tribes.
mm,
And so we take all that we know and create these situations where men get to sort of do what you did today to reboot themselves. And we leverage everything we can. The physiology and science and the peer-to-peer support, co-regulation, attachment theory, and all the things that the latest science has now proven,
mm,
we weave in together, and we've created these groups and programs that work. And nothing's a panacea.
mm.
But when a guy is basically healthy and he has the normal stress that guys have, childhood, divorce, business, maybe a bankruptcy, I mean those kinds of things, we're hugely successful. And and it's not that we're telling you how to be. No, I have a aversion to someone telling me how to be. We give you the tools that you never had, and
Mm,
we give you a place to practice those tools so
mm,
you can be skilled at using those tools. And once you become skilled, it becomes automatic. It's like you get really good at your right hand and you realize your left hand is sort of atrophied. And we start to strengthen that and build not only a strength but
mm,
agility, and you
mm.
become ambidextrous. So you don't just have your mind, but you got your emotions and your body as your ally.
Nice.
And often guys have their other allies. I mean, I'm in this one group I started 20 years ago, and I'm still in it. Even though the group continues to expand up in Idaho, where I left it, I'm in a Zoom group of some of the expats have been in it. So we've had like 500 guys in this group in a town of 800, no, 8,000 people. I mean, it just took off word of
Wow.
mouth because guys were changing. And
Wow.
guys would find us and go, I want what you have. And then
Nice.
that became three businesses, and the last business is now Meld.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Wow. Wow, this was an amazing, amazing discussion this morning. And maybe the universe, or if there is a God, or whatever, whoever guides us, has brought you into my life just at the right time to just recalibrate where I am going, where I need to go. And I think that is the best outcome of any kind of discussion, of any kind of podcast, of any kind of interview, of any kind of having a coffee together as two mates or maybe two strangers, who cares? But if that becomes a meaningful discussion that can change lives, well, if we just say that this has happened here today to the two of us, we both have grown. What was to happen if we make that a norm? What was to happen if we make that as the new future for a man, that we actually come together and spend some time. And with that, I don't mean having a beer with the mates.
Hmm.
Well, your mates are as dumb as you typically when it comes to the emotional intelligence. But maybe when you are seeking closeness or being open with men that are a bit further down the road than you are. And I think that is where Meld and other men's groups are coming in, because there is a certain guidance there. It's not just let's get together and have a piss up, or watch some or talk about the rugby or the football. No, this has a different role.
Right.
And
And I
yeah,
think guys want that. They just don't know
mm,
where to go to get it.
correct, exactly. No, it's wonderful. So melt.community. Guys, look down there into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast because Owen's details are down there. Owen, you're an amazing man. Thank you so much for coming onto my show today. This was indeed a gift. It was a privilege and honor for me to talk to you. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you. For me too, and thank you for all the work you're doing and helping people
Hmm.
and bringing in these new awarenesses with functional medicine
Mhm.
and movement and the body, and we need all that.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with intention. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Trying